Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am Elizabeth Gore, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Political Affairs here at EDF. And I am so excited to welcome you to today's event to discuss the Supreme Court's recent ruling on climate change and a couple of other key developments that we've seen in the climate space over the last couple of weeks. So, this conversation comes at a really pressing time for the nation when action on climate change is needed more than ever before. We just have to look at the heat waves that we're seeing across this country and across the world to recognize the importance of action. As we get started, I want to remind you that if you have a question at any time throughout the presentation, feel free to enter it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We want to hear from you. So we're here today to talk about the recent Supreme Court decision, which constrains EPA's authority to address the extensive climate pollution from existing power plants and the impact that that decision will have on the future of climate change, as well as other issues across the federal government. Before we dive in on that, I do want to talk for a moment about some other climate change news that has unfolded just in the past week. Like many of you, maybe all of you, we here at EDF are disappointed and frustrated that the reconciliation bill that is scheduled to move ahead in the United States Senate is scheduled to move without the climate provisions included in it. This is a setback for us in terms of getting these transformative provisions enacted, but I can assure you that we are still pushing and have been advocating with our friends and allies on Capitol Hill and across the community and across Washington and across the country to pry this opportunity back open and see if we can find a way to revisit the opportunity to add these widely supported climate provisions into the bill. We're also exploring other procedural legislative options. We are going to continue to fight. The stakes are too high and time is too short. So know that we haven't given up yet. But in addition, EDF has a number of other strategies that we've been developing in the event that this doesn't come together. We have other climate action that we're advocating for, such as sectoral initiatives and state-based work, plus a robust agenda of executive and administrative policies that are possible. We'll be collaborating with and advocating to the White House on a very ambitious path forward there. One of the items that I want to emphasize is that there are these existing tools under existing law that can help us make progress. And some of these tools will come up during our conversation today, and I just wanted to highlight that at the front. But back to the issue at hand, the Supreme Court case, which is the focus of most of our conversation today. I want to introduce two experts we have on the call with us today. I can't think of anyone who is more capable of joining us and having a great conversation on a bunch of these items, including the Supreme Court case. First, we have the Honorable Carol Browner, who has served as EPA administrator throughout the entire Clinton administration, and then served as White House senior climate advisor during the Obama administration. She now serves as senior of counsel with Covington and Burling. We are delighted to have you here today, and thank you for all the public service that you have contributed and the work that you've done on climate change and other environmental issues. Welcome, Carol.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that introduction, and to all of you who are joining us today. Thank you for what you do to contribute to this effort on climate change and so many important environmental issues. You know, I have worked with, been prodded by, been encouraged by EDF over many, many, many years, and it is always very wise and very sensible encouragement and ideas that the organization brings forward. It's also a real pleasure to be here with Vicki. Just a sort of maybe to get us started on the Supreme Court case. I actually thought I would start with a quote from Elena Kagan. Elena wrote the dissent, which if you are interested in Supreme Court decisions, reading her dissent would be worth your time. She's a very good writer. But she said, and I quote her, "Whatever else this court may know about, it does not have a clue about how to address climate change. And let's say the obvious, the stakes are high." She goes on to say the court appoints itself instead of Congress or the expert agency as the decision maker on climate policy. I cannot think of many things more frightening. And I think when all of us first saw the decision, we were very frightened. And it is a deeply troubling decision. But with time, we've had the opportunity to evaluate it. And it's important to understand both what it did and what it didn't do and what it portends for the future. So what it did is it basically said to EPA, you can only regulate within a small box. EPA had tried to be flexible, had tried to find the most cost-effective, sort of the common sense path forward, had looked at the realities in terms of where the power sector, where that industry is today, and to establish a rule based on that. And the court said, no, you can't do that. They didn't say you can't regulate greenhouse gases. They didn't say that. There's another Supreme Court decision, Mass versus EPA. They didn't overturn Mass versus EPA. And that's important because Roberts, who is still on the court, was a dissenter in Mass versus EPA. So we know that we have in the Chief Justice someone who doesn't like the case that really found and upheld EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gases. What this portends for the future, and it's not just for EPA, it's for all regulatory agencies, is this discussion about what they call the major questions doctrine. And I am not a constitutional scholar, I am not a Supreme Court scholar, but suffice it to say, I think it's kind of a made up thing. It doesn't appear until recently in legal writings. And basically what they're saying is there are some issues that the court believes are so big that they rightfully belong with Congress. There was a prior case that I was involved in over some air pollution decisions I made at EPA on ozone and fine particles, the first ever fine particle standards, which we also litigated. And the argument there is that was something called the non-delegation doctrine, which had been litigated previously in the Supreme Court. And basically they argued, our opponents argued that Congress had given me too much authority. The court actually upheld what I did, upheld EPA standards, and found that the Clean Air Act had not given unbridled discretion to the EPA administrator. And in fact, it was a rational implementation of that. So we have these different cases out there. They have not been overturned, but now we have this thing called the major questions doctrine. And what I think many of us are concerned about is that agencies, when they seek to regulate a pollutant, when they seek, like the Securities and Exchange Commission, to require climate risk disclosure, that they are going to be constrained in how they can do that. It is very clear that they are going to be constrained in their justification. So for example, when EPA says we got to regulate power plants because of climate change, they're probably not going to say that in the future. They're going to say we're going to regulate power plants because of all of these things that happen that are very, very dangerous, embedded in the Clean Air Act. But it is still an unfolding situation. There will be more litigation. But what I hope you can just take from this is that there are still avenues forward. The administration clearly has paths that it can pursue to regulate power plants. It can also regulate cars and trucks in terms of their emissions. And there are other tools that the administration will have. And maybe I don't know if we want to go to Vicki now, or if you want to spend a few minutes on the possibility of some sort of executive action, or maybe Vicki, you want to do that.
I just want to build from those thoughts, and thank you so much, Elizabeth and Carol. Just to underscore, EPA continues to have the responsibility and the authority to address climate pollution under existing law, and that means that EPA needs to move forward with great urgency in addressing those big sources, and those sources include power plants, new power plants, and existing power plants. And while the court constrained EPA's authority in some of the the solutions EPA can rely on in addressing existing power plants, EPA continues to have the responsibility to act. It also has the authority and responsibility to address methane pollution from oil and gas, the harmful tailpipe pollution from the transportation sector, new vehicles, new big freight trucks. And the good news is that when EPA does that and carries out that responsibility, it can also provide healthier communities, right? Because, there are a number of harmful contaminants that are discharged from these big emitting sources. And it can also do that in a way that helps create high quality jobs. This is an opportunity, for our country to move forward now with great urgency and to create a better, brighter future.
Thank you, Vicki. And I should have introduced you at the front end, but Vicki is our general counsel here at EDF, and she's got decades of experience. So she's a great addition to our panel today. But you both referenced existing authority. The White House is also reportedly considering new authority, new action, I should say, by declaring a national climate emergency. So I'd be interested to hear from both of you about what you think this means and what your reaction is to some of these reports. And Carol, maybe I can start with you.
Well, thank you. I think a statement, a declaration, a proclamation, it's important, but it is not the end of the story. It's what you do with it. It will be hugely important when the president does that, or if he does that, what he then directs his agencies to do. What powers does he open up? They did issue an order a few weeks ago. There was a finding, a national emergency relating to grid reliability. And what they did then is they said they would do things like use the Procurement Act to look at heat pumps, which are important, but they also directed the Department of Commerce to resolve a complicated tariff issue for solar panels and to provide some relief because the solar industry was sort of shutting down. And so, I think that's a very good example of you declare an emergency and then there are very specific actions that flow from that. And so, a lot of people have put a lot of possible actions out there. To Vicki's very, very good point, EPA has an obligation to do what EPA has to do, whether there's an executive order or declaration or whatever, they need to act and they have the authority to act. What a declaration would probably get you is bringing in other parts of the government that might be able to provide some action and support.
Yeah, I would just add that, it is an all hands on deck moment. And there are millions of people all across the country right now who are suffering the very serious effects of heat illness, and extreme heat. Our country has faced really serious adverse climate impacts. Fires that have had catastrophic impacts and taken many, many lives. Serious drought facing major parts of the country that really are quite urgent and serious, hurricanes and extreme weather events. And the president yesterday, he was in Somerset, Massachusetts, standing at the site of a former large coal plant. And he was talking about this as code red. He was talking about this as a climate emergency. And that is important for him to say that. And to explain that and to have that conversation. And he was doing it in a context where he was also talking about the new manufacturing facility that was going to be built at that site where, they're going to be manufacturing sort of undersea cables to bring offshore wind, to the grid all across New England and creating high quality manufacturing jobs. And those are the kinds of solutions that we need. And those are the kinds of solutions that we need with great urgency. And so we do need to call it what it is. It is a climate emergency. And we do need to make sure that we're relying on the powers, the additional protections that declaration unlocks. And it is not enough, right? We need to ensure that every agency does its job in protecting the American people and carrying out its responsibilities. And so the president talked about more to come, a plan to come. And it's up to all of us to hold him accountable and ensure that he delivers.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Vicki. Let's talk a little bit more about EPA. Vicki, you mentioned some of the rules that are in process there, including some of the vehicle regulations and methane. Can you expand on that a little bit and say what you see as the biggest priorities in the regulatory space that are separate from West Virginia case, that are separate from this declaration, that are moving forward on existing legal and legislative authority? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. And just, we do this work with many, many partners and many allies. And so we're all part of a big team, and we're super grateful for that. It takes a team, it takes a village to do all of this work in the most collaborative, high impact way. And right now, one of the things that the agency is looking at the science to determine whether the health-based standards for deadly particles need to be strengthened. And we're looking at a proposal relatively soon on that. That's important because that's going to make sure that we're following the science, we're restoring the science, and we're doing, what we need to do to protect communities from really harmful pollution. There are a number of other things. When you look at the biggest emitting sectors in our country, those biggest emitting sectors, that is the transportation, tailpipe emission from cars and freight trucks. It's the power plant smokestack pollution that causes, health harms for our children and communities and contributes extensively to the climate crisis. It's, looking at oil and gas methane, where if we can clean up and address oil and gas methane, we can help address one of the most potent immediate sources of climate pollution, help slow warming immediately in real time, and do that in a way that also provides for healthier communities by reducing harmful contaminants like benzene and other toxics. And so, EPA has all of these responsibilities to act. It retains the authority and responsibility to act. And we really need EPA and other policymakers across the federal government to act with the urgency that this moment demands.
Carol, anything to add there, either on EPA action or other agencies that you see as having priority policies that they could advance?
Well, I think Vicki laid out a very good list for EPA. We should also remember there was legislation that passed Congress, the Infrastructure, the Investment Act, and a lot of that is aimed at technologies that will be important to addressing climate change. And so I think that we need to encourage the administration, work with the administration to get that money out there, to get it into the field, to start creating those jobs and creating those opportunities. And then I also think there is obviously the role that the Department of Interior plays in leasing. And are we going to continue to use federal lands for to extract oil and gas? And so, it is, I think Vicki said it well, it is a sort of all of government moment. And what this requires in light of this decision in part is we sort of have to go through each agency and say, what are your authorities and what is the highest and best use of those authorities? And, we may find that there are authorities in places that we hadn't previously thought about. For example, at HHS, they have a job to protect children. Is there something they can be doing with their existing authorities to help address the needs? The president spoke yesterday, I thought very eloquently, and Vicki just mentioned it, to the impact of heat on people. And, so how do we think about not just addressing the immediate impact of heat on people? It kills more people than cold. And that's, very obviously something we have to address, but also how do we start to think about adaptation and resiliency? Because the reality is we're going to be living with this. And so a lot of authorities spread around the government that can be brought to bear.
The other part of this regulatory agenda that EDF's been working on is partnering with our friends on Capitol Hill to ensure that these agencies have the resources that they need to actually implement and enforce the rules that we're talking about today. And that's not something that gets a lot of headlines, but it's fundamental and foundational to making sure that they have the resources that they need to advance this agenda.
I mean, Elizabeth, I couldn't agree with you more. And, just because EPA is always in my heart, I mean, it has suffered tremendously under the last administration. It is in dire need of not just the money, but the people. We need more people to come into public service and to commit themselves to this work.
Let me ask you another question around the West Virginia EPA case, and that has to do with its impact on efforts by state and local governments or by the private sector. Does that case implicate anything that's happening in those other arenas? And Carol, maybe I'll start with you and then go to Vicki.
So there are some instances where states are relying on federal authority to do things. So for example, one of the things the administration could do is move forward what we call the California waiver. It is the provision that allows California to set stricter standards based on their air pollution. There are other states who then join with that. So that is set on federal standard. But there are lots of things that states can do without federal authority. And we see that happening in places, and sometimes there's more, and there needs to be even more. And then, in terms of the private sector, many of them have stepped up and made very, very significant commitments. And you all have worked with many to achieve that. We need to make sure they meet those commitments, that they are serious about their sustainability commitments, that they are serious about their human rights commitments, that they are serious about their net zero commitments. Nothing in this decision limits their ability to do those things. And they should be doing them, and they should be doing them quickly and aggressively.
Yeah, I would just add that, we're going to be continuing the work with many, many partners and allies to engage at the state level. And, it's important in its own right in addressing climate pollution. It's also, these are building blocks. These are models that help kind of come up with the good ideas, the innovation that inspires national scale action, other actions in other states, collaboration, partnerships. And it's kind of one of the hallmarks of our country that we have this system of innovation at the state and local level, and we need it in real intensity when it comes to climate change. Right now, California on August 25th is going to decide whether to adopt a new generation of clean car standards that will eliminate tailpipe pollution from new motor vehicles. That will be really, really important in addressing harmful smog pollution in California, protecting millions of people in California. Will be really important in addressing climate destabilizing pollution and saving people money at the gas pump when we're all looking for every single dollar to save. And at a time when auto manufacturers themselves are making billions of dollars of investments all across the country, in places like Kentucky and Texas and Georgia and Ohio and Michigan, and creating, thousands of jobs. And so, this is a moment of enormous opportunity if we can continue to move forward at the state and local level, unleash and encourage and support real world private sector action and leadership, and continue to make progress nationally. And so we need all of these tools in the toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier, Vicki, that this is an all hands on deck moment. And I think that really demonstrates it, talking about all of the different levers that exist and making sure that we're using all of them to make progress. Well, I've got one more question for you all before we go to our audience. So just want to encourage people, if you've got a question, put it in the Q&A box there. We're going to get to as many as we can. But before we do that, one other question for you all. What action can each of us take? All of us on the phone, we've got lots of folks listening in. What action can each of us take in our own lives to make a difference in addressing climate change? And Carol, I'll start with you again.
Well, my current labor of love is I chair the League of Conservation Voters Board of Directors, the LCV. So we would say vote. It is the single most important thing you can do. Engage and vote at every level of government. It makes a difference, and it makes a significant difference.
Here. And in a time where I think we all, there's just a lot of disruption in the world, and there's a lot of hardship, and I think we all feel it. And I think, one of the things we can all do is try to just make things better a little bit every day. And that's registering to vote. That's voting. That's, engaging, taking action on climate. And and encouraging others to take action on climate and having those conversations. We've got to talk about climate change. There's some really just great scientists and communicators who say, it begins with talking. We got to keep talking about it. We got to act on it. We have to engage. And one of the things we've got to share is that we have a slide here that is a way for all of us to engage, and that is to text right now code red to 52886, and you will receive an action alert where you can convey your support for President Biden acting with great urgency on climate change, building from his comments yesterday and his speech yesterday, where he talked about climate change as a clear and present danger to the American people. And so we need to support and encourage President Biden to continue to lead. So texting 52886, texting code red to 52886. So thanks so much.
If I can just follow up on something
Of
Vicki
course.
said, one of the things we know that, the social scientists and people who study how people make decisions, we know is that the most important, getting new information, you will trust it if it comes from somebody you know. So it's really important to Vicki's point. We got to talk to people. We got to talk to our friends. We got to talk to our family, right? I mean, it's everyone on this call. We have, find 3 or 4 people in your local coffee shop that you've become coffee buddies with. Talk to them about the need for action, because that is some of that is how people like to receive information, and that is the information they tend to trust.
The best information is information shared over coffee. I agree.
Or maybe wine.
Maybe. Okay, so we've got lots of questions in the queue here. So I'm gonna kick off. This one's for you, Vicki. This is from Andrew. And the question is, does the recent Supreme Court impact the energy intensive Bitcoin miners?
What the Supreme Court did is it constrained EPA's authority to address climate pollution from existing power plants. It doesn't address in any way EPA's authority and responsibility to address climate pollution from new power plants. What it underscores is that we've got to find ways to tackle the climate pollution from the power sector, and Bitcoin mining is a major source of demand for power. And so, right now, climate pollution from the power sector is at 1.5 billion tons. The US power sector is one of the single largest sources of climate destabilizing pollution in the world. If it were a country, it would be one of the largest in the world. So, as we are seeing sort of more demand from the power sector, we need all of the solutions for it to be clean, and we need those solutions to come from a wide variety of sources. So it's, that is this moment, meeting this moment and ensuring that as we see new demands in the power sector, they're met with clean energy.
Thank you. That's super helpful. The next question is finding a path to meeting the NDC, the National Determined Contribution. And Carol, maybe I can turn to you. The question is, are we on that path, and can we get on that path?
I would say we're approaching the path, but we're not quite on it. I mean, I think we had counted on Build Back Better. And obviously that is now an open question, and that would have included, for those who weren't following it, things like 10 years of tax credits for wind and solar, giving them a lot of certainty and stability in the market. That was a huge down payment to our NDC, but all is not lost. And to go back sort of where we started, there are all of these existing authorities in the administration that they can use that will achieve, real, measurable, enduring reductions. And that's what you want, right? We have to make sure that they're going to last. Vicki may have a better sense of what the models are telling us. If we took every power currently in the administration and did it in the best way possible, I don't know that we'd get all the way there, but we'd have a significant down payment.
Yeah, just I think we all just feel the urgency in achieving the science-based reductions that the president committed our country to achieve, and that is to cut climate pollution in half by 2030. We wake up every morning thinking, how can we make that, how can we make progress to that? It is urgent that we achieve those outcomes. Rhodium has some new analysis out. It just published on July 14th, and we can provide it in follow-up information here that looks at that, and it's worth a look to see kind of how we're doing, and based on current policies, and we need to do more. We need to do a lot more, and we can do a lot more. The notwithstanding the Supreme Court, which is based on kind of thinking about a 19th century world, we're in a 21st century world, and we need 21st century solutions to challenge these 21st century problems. And we have, the good news is we have those solutions. And here in Colorado, we're cutting climate pollution from the power sector 80% by 2030. That's what we need to do as a nation. And how are we doing that? We're doing that with investor-owned utilities. It's happening through our rural electric cooperatives. We're creating jobs. We're saving people money. We're actually keeping a large steel manufacturer in Pueblo, Colorado, that is staying in Pueblo, Colorado, 1,000 jobs, because it's cheaper to have utility scale solar than the coal-based power they were purchasing. The solutions are at hand, and we can meet this challenge. We have to really stay at it, and we can't let damaging decisions from the Supreme Court prevent our country from moving forward to meet these challenges. There is just too much at stake.
That's great, Vicki. The stats about the progress that Colorado is making it's encouraging, right? And it shows the universe of the possible. So I appreciate that. This is a question from Grace, and Carol, you had expressed some skepticism around this idea of the major questions doctrine, but Grace's question is could that be used? Could this argument be used to strike down other environmental and climate focused rules or approaches?
Yeah, so I should maybe be a little bit clear. I'm not skeptical that this court is embracing a major questions doctrine. I think that we can see that. I think we particularly see people like Gorsuch, who has a concurrence that is really about the major questions doctrine. So I think the concern we all have is how far they go with it. And again, it would not just be EPA, but it could be sort of across the landscape. And to sort of simplify that, what that would do is, in some instances, sort of take the issue and put it back over to Congress and sort of say Congress has to address this. Now, that is not what they did here. There's still a path for EPA on power plants. But, I think at least Elizabeth and I worked on the Hill once upon a time. I certainly dealt with the Hill a lot when I was at running EPA and then at the White House. Their ability to deal with major problems and major complicated technical issues is, it's not been improving, to say the least. And so, there's a reason you want regulatory agencies to do this. They're not free to do just anything. They operate within a law. They operate within the science. They have to propose what they're doing. They have to take public comment. They have to answer that comment. They have to litigate it. There's a whole process that unfolds that gives everybody sort of a bite at the apple. Congress is a little bit different. They don't have that kind of a process. And so, I think the concern that many of us have is if you see these, not just EPA issues, but major issues having to go back over to Congress, that we will be completely stymied in our ability as a country to really function and make progress in addressing whether it's, everything from climate change to perhaps things like childhood poverty, to racial justice. I mean, all of these are issues that are front and center, and, agencies work on them. But if the Supreme Court decides that they can't work on them, that is obviously a very difficult world we will live in, a very difficult country.
And I would say just it is anti-democratic in that, the statutes, the environmental statutes like the Clean Air Act, they were designed by Congress to reflect and adapt to new science, new technologies, new solutions. Congress recognized that there was going to be this additional new information. They wanted EPA to be able to take that into account in protecting the American people. Carol talked about the decision she made that was really important in 1997 to strengthen the health-based standards for millions and millions of people all across our country. That case did go to the Supreme Court. And as she indicated, in 2001, it was a unanimous Supreme Court, an opinion written by Justice Antonin Scalia, affirming that decision. And so, there will be lots of forces out there that try to use this Supreme Court ruling from June 30th to do damage, to wreak havoc, to slow us down. We will be in court with many partners, preventing them from doing that and fighting back and fighting for the American people. And if agencies do their job, if they carry out their responsibilities, anchored in the law and the science, we can move forward.
Mhm.
Here's a question about Interior. We talked a little bit about the Department of the Interior and its rulemakings. The question is from Bill, and he asks, if Department of Interior limits oil and gas exploration and drilling on federal lands, would that also restrict renewable deployment on federal land? Carol, you want to go for
I
it?
don't think so. I've never heard that. I'm not a Department of Interior federal lands expert by any means. I don't know, Vicki, if you've.
I would just say over the last year, there've been a number of new initiatives and projects announced for renewable energy on public lands, and they've been moving forward.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Lori Ann. She says, we've been talking about asking the president to take bold executive action. If he does, won't that action be challenged and overturned by the Supreme Court? Isn't this an outcome that we must avoid? How can we make these actions durable?
So obviously, every decision EPA makes now will be litigated. The days of working with the NGO community and working with industry to find a path forward, something we did with Obama when we set the original car standards. I think that those days are gone. What that means is the agency will have to be very careful in its justification and its legal authority in the science. They will have to, walk a path that really shows how they have the existing authority and how they have, all of the information they need to make the decision. But they can do that. That is something they're good at. They know how to do it. And then they will need to defend that in court. And so I am quite certain that both over at the Justice Department and at EPA, the lawyers now have become very key players in sort of how to structure your regulatory decision. Not what the science says. The science speaks for itself, but how you sort of create the right legal environment so that it is defensible in court.
And I would just add, Lorianne, and thank you for that important question. And that is that, there is the declaration of a climate emergency potentially that the president is evaluating, and evaluating carefully on the basis of the science and the law, and then the potential distinct authorities that would unlock. There have been other declarations under the National Emergencies Act, dozens and dozens across, Republican and Democratic administrations alike, that are precedents and that people can look at thoughtfully. That is separate from, the responsibility that the Environmental Protection Agency has right now, that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has right now, that the Department of the Interior has right now to continue to carry out their responsibilities under existing law. They, of course, are going to be careful and thoughtful. And there are lots and lots of attorneys all across those agencies that are looking at the Supreme Court's decision and thinking about it. And we're with you. We want these actions to be durable. That is how we make lasting progress. And sometimes, there are going to be setbacks. We will not be deterred.
This is a question from Marcia again about EPA climate regulations and some of the rules that you both have talked about that are in the pipeline. And her question is, what's the status of those? How far along are they? When would we be expecting some of the new EPA rules that you both have discussed?
They're all on different schedules, and maybe, I don't know, Vicky, if there's something maybe we can provide to people afterwards. It would be hard to, and those, I mean, I think what I would say is, we see schedules, that's great. We'd like them to hurry up. We'd like them to get it right. So don't hurry up too much and not get it right. I think, it occurred to me something we should have mentioned at the beginning. In the litigation in the Supreme Court, there was obviously the conservative attorney generals, West Virginia was sort of the lead. But on supporting EPA, and one of my colleagues at Covington actually argued, was a group of progressive power plants. So the industry was there making an argument about how they should be regulated. They weren't there saying, don't regulate us. They were saying, give us the flexibility. And so, as dark as the case can sometimes seem, it does give me some sort of hope that you do have these pockets of industry out there who appreciate the certainty and predictability that government regulation provides. And allows them then to go to the markets, to get the money, to make the capital investments, to make the changes, to get us to cleaner energy. And so, as we think about sort of all of the pieces moving right now, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that even in the power sector, there were companies who stood up in the court and said, no, we want to be regulated.
Yeah. And I would just say, Marcia, thank you for that really great question. And we will follow up with a schedule, a summary of kind of some of the actions and the key timetables. Just a couple that are coming like quite soon is, we're anticipating Administrator Regan will, in the next few months, propose his approach to protecting the American people from deadly particle pollution. That will be on the basis of the best available science, and a really important decision. We also anticipate by the end of this year that he will finalize important pollution limits on new freight trucks that impose a heavy burden on communities that have been bearing a heavy burden for far too long from diesel freight truck pollution, and also help us move forward in addressing climate pollution. And then the next up, and there are a number, would be kind of proposing the next tier of clean car standards. Carol Browner, when she was administrator of EPA, she adopted one of those important tiers of clean car standards that just took our country forward in a really important way. This is proven, well-established authority where we can address an array of harmful pollutants on the basis of these new zero-emitting solutions that we have that the manufacturers themselves are delivering, and they create an enormous opportunity for high-quality jobs and economic growth. And we'll also see a supplemental proposal on the oil and gas methane standards in the next couple of months. That will be out soon as well. And we'll need all of you to help with all of those, and we'll be following up with action alerts and urging you to help us in raising your voice and offering your perspective and insight on these important initiatives.
The next question I have is from Kendra, and she says, I care a lot about environmental justice. Can EPA incorporate environmental justice in its rulemaking?
So there is, I think, as Kendra, you may know, there is no statute that specifically speaks to environmental justice. Those words do not appear. There is no doubt that the administration, from the president to the administrator to Mr. Regan, are very focused on this. So what they're going to have to do is think about how they structure their rules to ensure both the intended consequences, but also avoiding unintended consequences, and really speaking to those frontline communities. It may be hard for them to say we are doing this as an environmental justice rule because there is no statute they can point to, but they certainly can use their other authorities to make sure that the communities, the most impacted communities, are in fact getting the right level of protections.
Yeah, and Kendra, just we need to do so much more in our country to address the inequities of pollution with great urgency, and many of the major sources of climate pollution are major sources of other just health harming contaminants that impose a very heavy burden on communities, and we've got to tackle all of these challenges with great urgency. Administrator Regan had a journey to justice where he met with the communities, all, that are bearing this burden and have for generations. And, we've all got to do all that we can to support that leadership. And we've all got to do all we can to continue to fight for justice. And it's just essential.
The next question is from Virginia. And she says, do you have a plan for educating new and future voters on protecting their environment and their planet? And I'm going to actually take a swing at that to kick us off, and you all can certainly supplement. But at EDF, we see this as a critical part of our mission. And we are engaged on both EDF and EDF Action to make sure that when voters go to the polls in November and beyond, that they have the information about how different candidates have responded to the climate crisis. And so we are very active in making sure that voter education happens. We have been engaged not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level as well, to make sure that we are educating voters across the generations. You said both new and future voters, and absolutely agree that that's a critical part of advancing this, not just in the short term, but over the long term. We need to be electing pro-climate candidates. Defend Our Future is a part of EDF that focuses on younger voters, 18 to 30, and they are a critical part of elevating this issue among new voters. So absolutely a really important part of our mission, and something that we will be very active on between now and the elections in November. And Carol, Vicki, I don't know if you have anything else you'd want to add.
No, that was, thank you.
Okay, the next question is from James. He is a emerging sustainability professional, and he says, where should we have the most focus to have the most impact on having an equitable, clean energy transition? So as we look to clean energy transition in a lot of these different communities that have relied on fossil fuels, where's the best bang for the buck in terms of our focus?
Well, I think the part of what the administration is doing in terms of the investments, we talked about the infrastructure investments, is, making sure, there's sort of a couple issues maybe in that. One is what happens to communities in terms of the jobs that may be lost because we're transitioning. There's also what has historically happened to communities in terms of the pollution burden, the disparate and pollution burden that these communities have experienced. And we need to address both of them. And sometimes they're not the same communities. I certainly think, and Vicki has said this several times today, that investing in the new technologies and creating the jobs and training the workers will be hugely, hugely important. And, training people for, high paying jobs. I think in terms of protecting communities that have been disproportionately impacted from decades of pollution, sort of from our modern industrial life, is something that EPA does have to take very seriously as it establishes regulations. And there are some regulations that might get you a solution, but you still fail to address the needs of these historic communities and these ongoing challenges. And I do want to just give a shout out to Michael Regan, the administrator of EPA. I think he has taken this very, very seriously. I think his boss, I think the president, a number of us in the environmental community spent a lot of time with Mr. Biden on his journey to the White House. And we spoke a lot about environmental justice and the equitable transition that would be important. And I think it was something that he has taken quite seriously. But again, it's like all of this, doing it sort of bit by bit, piece by piece, building the structure, building the path forward. It's an attention to detail, and it's one that we all need to work with the administration on, and we need to keep moving.
I would just say, James, I'm just really grateful to you for wanting to work on sustainability. We need your help. Keep at it, and let's build out your community. And as you're on your journey doing that important work, if at any point you want to reach out and share your thoughts and give us feedback, would welcome that. It's we need your engagement. So thank you.
So one more question before we start to wrap it up here. And it's about Michael Regan. And the question is, do you know him, and what's he like? And, tell me, the question was from Sally, just a little bit more about who he is and what he's, what his strengths are at this critical time.
Important to note, in his background, he worked at EPA as a young college graduate when I was there, and then he worked at EDF. What more do we need to say? Look, I've had the pleasure of knowing him for a while. I think he is very committed. He is very serious. And when you're alone with him, he can be funny. A little bit of you need a little bit of humor when you're at EPA, able to laugh at yourself on occasion.
Sally, thank you for that question. And I would just add that you have to be strong to be administrator of EPA. Carol Browner lived through that. She knows what that takes. It takes just an enormous amount of grit, and Administrator Regan has grit. He is a strong person, and he has climbed mountains in his life. He has been up against the wall, and I can tell you, and he's extraordinary. Yeah.
Yes, we're very lucky to have him there.
He's a very strong person, and it takes just an enormous amount of strength, as Carol can attest to.
Well, this has been a great conversation. We've gotten through lots of questions. There are still others that we didn't get to, but I want to leave a few minutes here at the end and give each of you a chance. If you have any closing remarks, anything you want to lift up before we end the session, or anything else that you want to add. Vicki, maybe I can start with you.
No, we just need everyone's help here. It is really all the tools in the toolbox. This is an enormous challenge, and it's also an enormous opportunity. And we are going to have setbacks. We're going to have challenges, and we are making progress. The power sector that was the subject of the Supreme Court case in 2005, we were at 2.5 billion tons. And today we're at 1.5 billion tons. We've reduced power sector pollution by almost a gigaton. That is an enormous amount of progress, and it's because of the leadership of people like Carol Browner. It's because of state and local innovations, because of private sector commitment. It's grassroots engagement. People like James committed to sustainability, and that's what it's going to take. All of those efforts to address the climate crisis, and we can get this done. We just have to stay at it.
Vicki said it very well. And I just want to say what an honor it is to be with these two wonderful women and committed environmentalists and leaders. And to all of you who took the time, I assume you phoned in because you wanted to learn a little bit about the Supreme Court case, but to everything you do in terms of making the world a better place. I do want to closer to where we started, which is it's important. The case has some troubling aspects to it. I don't want to suggest it doesn't, but in terms of EPA's ability to regulate pollution, dangerous pollution from power plants, they can do that. And it's going to require all of us sort of helping them do that, leaning in and bringing, whether it's the expertise that EDF brings to the agency on a regular basis, or the letter writing campaigns, the number you put up earlier, or taking the time to vote when it comes to November. But, obviously this is a group of folks who cares deeply about these issues. And so I just want to thank you, as someone who's been in the movement for a very, very long time, for everything you do. And more importantly, I guess, for everything you will do in the coming weeks and months. So to all who joined today, thank you.
Well, thank you, Carol. I really appreciate your time today, and you and Vicki have been great assets to this conversation and answering all of the questions that have come in from our audience. And I want to thank the audience for joining us today and being a part of the conversation. Thanks for all the support that you give EDF and all the support that you have for our mission. So have a great afternoon, and thanks to everybody for joining us.
Thank you so much. Be well.